Mr. Chairman, there is lots to work on. Now, colleagues, it was just a matter of time before the Trump administration set the new high water mark for public corruption. That moment arrived a little more than 2 weeks ago with the settlement of Trump's ridiculous IRS lawsuit. This hearing is the first opportunity for Congress to examine it. So let's start by zooming out to get a full appreciation of how dirty this whole situation has been. Donald Trump sued his own administration for $10 billion over a tax return leak that happened on his watch. A judge appeared ready to toss the lawsuit, so Trump rushed a settlement for personal gain. The acting attorney general went out yesterday and said they're not moving forward with the $1.8 billion insurrection slush fund. The other part of this settlement apparently remains in place, and that is the part that presents the biggest direct benefit to Trump. Todd Blanche let Trump off the hook for potentially $100 million in back taxes by canceling what's reported to be a long-running dispute with the IRS. Then he let the entire Trump family and the Trump organization off the hook for any tax crimes they may have committed in the past. As of right now, everybody in America is subject to audit except the Trump family. Unfortunately, the Senate Republican leader was quoted this morning saying that this is business as usual.
Welcome back to the Blue Brief. Before we get into this explosive Senate Finance Committee showdown, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications because we are breaking down the moments the mainstream media would rather leave out. Senator Ron Wyden came into this hearing looking for answers from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, and he clearly wanted to turn the Trump IRS settlement into a political bombshell. But here's the problem for Wyden. Making a serious accusation is one thing, proving it is something completely different. And what we witnessed was a fascinating clash between an aggressive Democratic senator demanding immediate answers and a Treasury Secretary refusing to speculate about an ongoing legal matter. So let's break down exactly what happened, because there is much more to this hearing than the shouting points.
That it's a standard settlement. The reality is that's totally wrong. 2 former IRS commissioners have now confirmed that this is completely without precedent. It's the ultimate case of an ultra-wealthy individual living under one set of rules while everybody else lives under another, a crooked double standard that benefits Trump and family. I take it as an admission of his own guilt when it comes to tax cheating. Trump and his family have been stuffing every dollar they can grab into their own pockets. If everything was on the level, it seems to me he wouldn't need Todd Blanche to get the IRS off his back. Secretary Bessent owes the committee an explanation of what the Treasury knows about the dirty settlement. That's because his department was involved from beginning to end. Treasury was a defendant and a negotiator in the lawsuit. It was informed by IRS attorneys that Trump had no real case. And it sure looks to me like Treasury's top lawyer quit his job in objection to the settlement. This is an abuse of the IRS that goes way beyond anything that I have any familiarity with. My view is this committee needs to investigate this on a bipartisan basis. Blanche allegedly dropped the insurrection fund, doesn't change that. So what's particularly shocking about a corrupt deal like this is it comes when so many American families are fearful about the economy. I was home last week having 4 town hall meetings in parts of my state that are bright red. And what they talked to me about was the pain of inflation going up, wage growth going down, the job market flattening. The Trump administration doesn't seem to care. Last week, Secretary Bessent was asked during an interview about price increases caused by the Iran war. He said, I quote, "It was less than $200 in extra gasoline costs. All the Democrats want to talk about is beef and gasoline." Now, to me, you might think that a political leader couldn't get any more dismissive of people's economic concerns. But then Donald Trump topped it himself. When asked if Americans' financial situations made him think about ending the war that he started, he said, and I quote, "Not even a little bit." He continued, "I don't think about Americans' financial situation. I don't think about anybody." Mr. Chairman and colleagues, I've never heard a President of the United States talk in such a dismissive way about the hurt of the American people. And then he rambled through his ever-changing goals in the quagmire of a war. No sympathy for struggling families at all from the President. Americans are increasingly spending down their savings and going into debt to get by. The people running the country are ratcheting up the cost of living with wars, tariffs, and cuts to health care and basic services. It's cold comfort to somebody who had to max out their tax credit card to feed their kids that Trump might get his face on a $250 bill. But that's the kind of priority that apparently the Treasury Department is focusing on these days. Even outside of economic matters, the Treasury Secretary is simply out of step with the American people. There's no better example than the fact that there's been a cover-up of the massive file of Epstein's financial records for a year and a half. This is part of the effort I've made. It's the only one to follow the money in the Epstein situation, and yet there's been a denial of access to committee investigators and lying in public about their significance. That subject alone deserves its own hearing. Senate investigators are trying to figure out who paid Epstein for girls, and unfortunately, Secretary Bessent is involved in preventing that from happening. The bottom line in this administration is the machinery of government works to the benefit of Donald Trump before all else. That's the corrupt framework that produces insurrection slush funds, protects pedophiles, and dismisses the concerns of people who are worried about being able to make rent and to feed their families. There is an awful lot for the committee to discuss today, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to question and answers.
Thank you for convening today's hearing. I'm grateful for this opportunity to discuss President Trump's 2027 budget, which builds on this administration's progress in unleashing a new era of economic expansion.
Could you pull the microphone a little bit closer?
Sure. I last appeared before this committee just a few weeks before the Senate passed the Working Families tax cuts. So on the heels of the most successful filing season in IRS history, I'd be remiss if I did not begin by thanking the committee for helping to deliver this once-in-a-generation bill to the President's desk. This day, under President Trump, we celebrated how much more money hardworking Americans kept, not how much the government took. Over 62 million tax returns claimed at least one of the President's signature new tax cuts. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime, deductibility of American car loan interest, and enhanced deduction for low and middle income seniors. All told, the average refund increased by over 11%, with refunds increasing by 18%. But as important as what this legislation achieved is what it prevented. If opponents of the working family tax cuts had their way, our economy would have absorbed the largest tax hike in its history, over $5 trillion. 90% of American taxpayers would have seen their standard deduction slashed, while 40 million families would have seen their child tax credit halved. Instead, this committee held the line, and the American people had a better tax day because of it. Notably, President Trump's pro-growth policies don't stop at putting more money back in the pockets of working and middle-class families. They extend to placing the American dream within the closer reach of their children. For context, nearly 40% of Americans have no exposure to our great U.S. equity market, no stake in the companies they helped to build. Trump accounts represent a profound reimagining of that arrangement. They will ensure that every American child can benefit from private ownership and compound growth, that every American child, in short, is born a shareholder. To date, nearly 6 million Trump accounts have been opened, with 1.4 million eligible for the $1,000 seed contribution. Of course, As his tax cuts deliver relief for working-class Americans, President Trump's economic agenda is bolstered by two other distinct but reinforcing levers: trade and deregulation. Let me briefly address both in turn.
Wyden opened by portraying the Trump IRS dispute as one of the most outrageous examples of government corruption in American history. His argument was straightforward. Trump sued the government over the disclosure of his tax information. The case eventually moved toward a settlement, and Wyden believes that settlement could have provided extraordinary benefits to Trump, his family, and his businesses. That is a serious allegation. But here's where I think conservatives need to slow down and separate facts from political theater. If there really was an improper agreement giving special treatment to President Trump, Congress absolutely has the right to investigate it. Nobody, including a Republican president, should receive a secret exemption from the law. But if the settlement was legally authorized, then the American people deserve to know that too. And that's where Scott Bessent's testimony becomes important. Wyden repeatedly demanded a simple yes or no answer about whether alleged IRS audit protections for Trump and his family remained in effect. Bessent refused to give him that answer. Instead, he repeatedly cited ongoing litigation and explained that the Justice Department was handling the government's legal representation. Now, Wyden clearly wasn't satisfied. He pressed harder. He asked who originated the decision. He questioned whether Treasury had referred the relevant tax disputes to the Justice Department. He brought up an alleged IRS memo prepared by career attorneys. He demanded records concerning Treasury contracts, and he questioned the timing of several government decisions. From Wyden's perspective, he was building a chain of circumstances that he believes deserves congressional investigation. And frankly, here's the part where I agree with Wyden on principle. Congress should investigate government decisions when there are legitimate questions about how taxpayer money and federal authority are being used. But investigating something is not the same thing as proving corruption. That distinction matters. Throughout the hearing, Bessent maintained that he could not provide additional details because litigation was ongoing. To his critics, that looked like stonewalling. To supporters of the administration, it looked like a Treasury Secretary refusing to publicly discuss confidential legal matters simply because a senator demanded an answer on television. And that difference is the heart of this confrontation. Then Bessent shifted the conversation toward the Trump administration's economic agenda. And this is where the hearing became much bigger than one IRS dispute. Bessent pointed to tax reductions, increased refunds, manufacturing investment, deregulation, and policies designed to put more money into the hands of working Americans. He argued that the administration's approach was about allowing Americans to keep more of what they earn, rather than expanding government control over the economy. That's a fundamentally different philosophy from what we heard from Wyden. Wyden's argument was centered on government accountability and alleged preferential treatment. Bessent's argument was centered on economic growth and the administration's broader tax agenda.
First, the president is undeterred in his determination to open markets for U.S. goods and services while rebuilding U.S. manufacturing capacity. Over the 12 months ending March 26, the trade deficit for goods declined by approximately $370 billion compared to the same time frame ending March 2025. The economy has added 313,000 net private sector jobs and 13,000 manufacturing jobs in the past 2 months. Firm capital expenditures rose at an annual rate of over 17% in the first quarter, and companies are investing trillions to build and expand here at home. American industry is winning again to the benefit of American workers. A whole of government approach, meanwhile, is coupling our manufacturing revival with a great regulatory reset. Properly calibrated regulation is essential for economic growth, capital formation, employment, and higher wages. So at the outset of this administration, President Trump set the ambitious benchmark of slashing 10 existing regulations before issuing a single new one. In 2025, we shattered the goal with a ratio of 129 to 1. As a result, the regulatory actions generated more savings last year than in those of the prior Trump administration combined. Separately, any one of our initiatives on trade, tax cuts and deregulation would be substantial. Taken together, they are transformative. Before President Trump took office, our trading partners exploited America's markets, our regulatory states smothered businesses, and our tax code was poised to punish workers and job creators. Today, his policies are driving lower taxes, bigger paychecks, and broader prosperity. So I thank you on this committee for its partnership in this critical work, and I look forward to building upon our stride through the President's budget for the year ahead. Thank you. And I had hoped to keep this in terms of the economy. Senator Wyden has mendaciously slandered the Treasury building in an attempt to cover up his son having an investment meeting with Jeffrey Epstein to ask for funding. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Let's be clear here. Nobody is interested in the ramblings of a capo in the most corrupt regime in American history. We want to get some facts about this deal. That's what we're here for. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and I will ask my questions first today.
And we would like to hear what Adam Wyden and Jeffrey Epstein talked about. Your son's largest investment position was Rick's Cabaret. So did your son and Jeffrey Epstein talk about pole dancing as he begged him for money using your limited credibility?
Should I just proceed?
As we've done throughout this matter, the Department of Treasury is following the direction of the Department of Justice. And as you noted, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche testified yesterday that the government will not be moving forward with the fund. We intend to comply with that direction. I do not have any additional details into what that means at this time, but I will note that even with the Acting Attorney General Blanche's statements yesterday, this matter is still subject to ongoing litigation, so I'm unable to comment further on it. As with all department litigation, the Department of Treasury and the IRS were represented by the Justice Department, so any additional questions about the settlement or the fund should be addressed to the Justice Department and Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche.
Secretary, yesterday, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche indicated that the administration is not moving forward with the slush fund, but there's been no indication of what this means for the Trump alleged IRS audit immunity. So my first question is, does the IRS audit immunity given to Trump, his family, and his businesses still stand? I'd like a yes or no answer to that.
You didn't ask me the question. You can't tell me how to answer it. So,
I got five minutes. I'm going to use them for these questions.
You're using up your time now, sir. As I said, I am unable to comment with this ongoing litigation.
Okay. So that we understand what's at stake here, this immunity deal is the biggest scam against the taxpayer in American history. And Americans are going to pay taxes, and Trump and his clan won't. So we'll start with that. Now, my second question is, every president's tax return gets audited, Mr. Secretary. Who originated the May 19th addendum canceling Trump's audits? Was it Trump, DOJ, or Treasury?
Again, sir, as Albert Einstein said, doing the same thing and expecting a different answer is the definition of insanity.
You've given no answers on this subject, and that's why I'm going to ask these questions.
And because, as I said, there's ongoing litigation.
Does the DOJ have the authority to settle a tax dispute unilaterally?
The DOJ acts as the attorney for Treasury and the IRS.
So the tax code says the DOJ can only settle a tax dispute if you, the Treasury Secretary, first deferred the dispute to DOJ in the case we're talking about. So here, Trump, his kids, all of the business entities they own, potentially thousands of tax returns, and unless you referred every single one of those tax returns to DOJ, the addendum is invalid, or the Treasury and the IRS believe have been more involved in this scandal, as far as I can tell, than you've led us to believe. So I'm going to keep digging into the timetable here. Career IRS attorneys wrote a 25-page memo preparing defenses against Trump's lawsuit, and they recommended DOJ move to have Trump's lawsuit dismissed. The IRS reportedly gave this memo to Treasury officials in April before the settlement. Did you see that memo?
Again, there's continuing litigation, and I'm unable to answer.
Will you provide this committee with a copy of the IRS memo?
Again, there's continuing litigation.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to continue my questions, but I would like to ask you now to authorize the 6103 waiver and for Mr. Bessent to waive the attorney-client privilege, which I guess is part of what he's up to.
I will not, I'm not quite sure what you're asking, but I will not agree to ask him to waive his attorney-client privilege.
So the way we're going to get to the bottom of it is to have the committee look at these matters in a bipartisan way, and I'm just going to continue with the questions that highlight my argument. The Biden administration prosecuted Charles Littlejohn, the Booz Allen contractor who leaked Trump's tax returns. Booz Allen, which helped with the prosecution, held contracts with the Treasury Department for years. 3 days before Trump filed his lawsuit this year, you abruptly canceled all the contracts. It is hard to see that timing be a coincidence. Did you know in advance that Trump was going to file a suit against the IRS?
I did not.
All right, I've written to you twice asking for records related to this decision. Both times you refused. I'll ask again. Will you send the committee all records documenting this decision so we can review this in a bipartisan fashion?
Again, there is ongoing litigation, and Senator, how we got here was a violation of President Trump's 6103 rights. And it wasn't just President Trump. There were 400,000 tax returns that were leaked by Mr. Littlejohn. And I will point out that Mr. Littlejohn was not prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. He was eligible to be prosecuted on 3 counts. The Biden administration chose light touch and only prosecuted him on 2 counts.
We're going to continue these questions, and I come back to my point, Mr. Chairman. We need you to support this 6103 waiver so that this committee on a bipartisan basis can look into a matter like this. When you're talking about the President of the United States, it doesn't get any more important. And I'll just close my opening effort to try to ferret out the facts here, Mr. Chairman, by saying, Mr. Secretary, this whole settlement, in my view, is the most brazen abuse of power ever in our history. And as of now, every American is subject to audit except Donald Trump and his family. I think that's absurd, and you've been dodging questions. Each one of these, you had a legal argument for saying nothing. And I suspect you cleared the way for Trump's lawsuit when you canceled the contracts, and I suspect people right up to the highest level of the Treasury Department had a hand in crafting this unbelievably corrupt gift of a settlement. And I just want it understood, colleagues, I want to work with every senator on this committee to get to the bottom of this, because we aren't getting the facts. And the Secretary, in spite of the fact that he owes answers to the American people, is just dodging and bobbing and weaving. Thank you.
And conservatives should understand why that distinction matters. The tax code should not have one set of rules for political insiders and another set of rules for ordinary Americans. But neither should political opponents be allowed to declare someone guilty simply because they don't like the settlement or because the administration refuses to discuss an ongoing legal case. Evidence matters, documentation matters, due process matters, and that's exactly why Wyden's demand for records is more significant than the dramatic accusations. If Congress believes something improper happened, then subpoena the documents, examine the legal memos, establish who authorized the decisions, determine what Treasury officials knew, and let the evidence speak. That's how oversight is supposed to work. One of the most revealing moments came when Wyden raised an alleged IRS memo prepared by career attorneys that reportedly argued Trump's lawsuit should be dismissed. If that memo exists and was provided to Treasury officials before the settlement, then Congress has every reason to examine it. What did it say? Who received it? Who reviewed it? Was its recommendation rejected? And why? Those are legitimate questions. But again, those questions need evidence-based answers rather than conclusions reached before the investigation even begins. The same applies to Wyden's questions about Treasury contracts with Booz Allen. He highlighted the timing of contract cancellations shortly before Trump's lawsuit and suggested the timing deserved scrutiny. Maybe it does, but suspicious timing by itself isn't proof of a conspiracy. That's something politicians on both sides need to remember. Now, there was another major political battle happening underneath all of this. Wyden tried to connect the IRS controversy to broader complaints about inflation, government spending, foreign policy, and the administration's handling of Epstein-related financial records. This is where I think the hearing became less focused. When you're investigating a specific tax settlement, throwing every other controversy into the same speech can make the central argument less convincing. If the IRS settlement is the issue, then investigate the IRS settlement. Follow the documents, follow the money, follow the chain of authority, and if somebody broke the law, hold them accountable. That's the conservative position I would take. We shouldn't defend misconduct simply because someone has an R next to their name, but we also shouldn't accept accusations simply because someone has a microphone and a Senate seat. And that brings us back to Scott Bessent. Was Bessent convincing? That depends on what you expected from him. If you wanted him to answer every question immediately, he didn't do that. If you wanted him to speculate about ongoing litigation, he refused to do that. And if you believe the Treasury Department should provide Congress with additional records once legally permissible, then that's a reasonable position to take. But Wyden's inability to get a direct answer doesn't automatically establish that his worst allegations are true. That's the point I think gets lost in political coverage. A hearing is not a courtroom, a senator making an accusation is not a verdict, and a witness refusing to comment on ongoing litigation is not automatically an admission of guilt. The real question is what the documents ultimately show. If the evidence demonstrates that President Trump or his administration received an unlawful tax benefit unavailable to other Americans, then that's a serious problem, and it should be dealt with regardless of party. But if the settlement was legally authorized and properly negotiated, then the public deserves that fact to be established just as clearly. That's why conservatives shouldn't be afraid of investigations. Truth doesn't need political protection. If Trump is right, the evidence should prove it. If Wyden is right, the evidence should prove that too. And if both sides are exaggerating their claims for political advantage, then the American people deserve to know that as well. What I saw in this hearing was a senator determined to make the biggest possible case against the Trump administration, and a Treasury Secretary determined not to give him the soundbite he wanted while litigation remained active. That's political theater, yes, but it's also a reminder that government accountability should be based on documents, law, and facts, not viral clips. And that's where I think conservatives have an opportunity. We should demand transparency without abandoning due process. We should defend Trump when accusations aren't supported by evidence, but we should never defend wrongdoing simply because it's politically convenient. That's what principled conservatism looks like. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think Ron Wyden raised legitimate questions that Congress needs to investigate, or do you think he turned an ongoing legal dispute into another political attack against the Trump administration? And what do you make of Scott Bessent repeatedly refusing to answer questions because of ongoing litigation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you found this breakdown informative, hit the like button, subscribe to the Blue Brief, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next political deep dive. The mainstream media can give you the headline. We're going to examine what happened behind it. This is the Blue Brief. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.